The Winchester Model 1866. Yellow Boy rested against Mahaska's shoulder, its distinctive brass receiver gleaming dully in the harsh Arizona sun. The 44 rimfire cartridges he'd meticulously loaded and tested at dawn could strike a man dead at 300 yards in the right hands. Through the crude sight he'd modified with a brass bead front post, he tracked the blue uniformed officer crossing the yard at Fort Defiance, Lieutenant Wilson, the man who had ordered the massacre of Mahaska's family. One shot, one moment of justice. Mahaska's finger caressed the trigger, his breathing slowing to an imperceptible rhythm. The distance, 212 yards by his calculation, demanded precision but remained well within his capabilities. The Apache warrior adjusted his position slightly, compensating for the 5-mile-per-hour crosswind that rustled the desert sage around him. The officer paused to light a cigarette, making himself a perfect target. Mahaska exhaled half a breath and held the remainder, as he'd been taught by Mexican Army marksmen during his 5 years of service with their frontier battalion. In that suspended moment, Mahaska saw his wife Maria's face. Her dark eyes, which had captivated him during his deployment to her village near Sonora, filled with terror as the soldiers approached their home. He heard his daughter Kaya's scream cut short by Springfield rifle fire. 6 months had passed, yet the memory remained razor sharp, driving him forward when despair threatened to consume him. The wind shifted suddenly. Mahaska instinctively adjusted, compensating for the new angle. A shout from across the fort yard. Wilson turned toward the sound, moving just as Mahaska's finger squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck dirt where the officer had stood a heartbeat before. The sound echoed across the canyon walls. A mistake. Mahaska cursed his eagerness as he melted back into the rocks, using the techniques he'd perfected during years of hunting elk in the high country. His moccasins left barely a trace on the rocky soil as he retreated, already planning his next attempt. Another day, another chance. The spirits of his family would wait a little longer for vengeance. Nahele, Mahaska's older brother and war chief of their dwindling band, had ordered him to scout Fort Defiance. The information would guide their planned raid. How many soldiers, what weapons, patrol schedules. But Mahaska had his own mission. He tracked Wilson for months, following the lieutenant's reassignment from Camp Grant to Fort Defiance. The officer had led the attack that slaughtered Mahaska's family, while he and other warriors were hunting elk in the high country. When they returned, they found only ashes and bodies. Maria had died shielding Kaya with her own body. Both were gone before Mahaska could say goodbye. The Apache tradition demanded blood for blood, a teaching he'd temporarily abandoned during his years with the Mexican Army, but one that now consumed him. As dusk deepened into night, Mahaska observed soldiers returning to the fort. New faces among them, reinforcements. A supply wagon rolled through the gates. From his hidden position on the ridge, he counted 32 men with Springfield Model 1866 rifles. The fort had received a shipment of new Gatling guns, death machines that could fire 200 rounds per minute, cutting down a charging war party in seconds. Mahaska had seen such weapons during his military service. In 1864, serving under Colonel Miguel Campos in the Mexican Army's Northern Division, he'd helped operate one against Comanche raiders. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd once fought against his own kind, believing Mexico's promises of land in peace. Those promises had proven as empty as the American treaties. A stagecoach arrived, disgorging a lone passenger, a woman, slender but strong-looking, with auburn hair partially hidden under a practical hat. She carried a small valise and moved with caution, scanning her surroundings constantly. Not the behavior of typical white settler women, who rarely traveled alone and often seemed oblivious to their surroundings. Mahaska watched as she was greeted by an older woman, the fort commander's wife, judging by the deference shown to her. The newcomer must be the cook they'd hired. Fort Defiance trading post had posted notices as far as St. Louis seeking someone for their kitchen. The Apache warrior settled in for the night, wrapping himself in a rabbit fur blanket against the desert's bitter cold. He would watch. He would wait. The woman was nothing, merely another white face in an enemy stronghold. His focus remained on Wilson and the vengeance that would restore his honor. 3 days later, fate intervened. Mahaska was tracking the newcomer, Eleanor Morgan, he'd overheard, as she ventured beyond the fort's immediate vicinity, not from carelessness but strategy. Learn the enemy's patterns, find weaknesses, assess the fort's blind spots. She moved with unexpected purpose, gathering plants along a dry wash. Her hands worked confidently, selecting specific herbs that Mahaska recognized as medicinal. Golden seal for infections, willow bark for pain, prickly pear for wounds. Knowledge unusual for a white woman. When 3 riders emerged from behind an outcropping, Mahaska recognized trouble immediately. Not soldiers, outlaws, the kind that preyed on anything vulnerable. Their horses, a dappled gray, a chestnut, and a black, were good stock, probably stolen. The men carried Colt revolvers and Warren Spencer carbines, weapons favored by Confederate deserters who drifted west after the war. The lead rider circled Eleanor, backing her against the rocks. "What's a pretty thing like you doing out here alone?" Mahaska expected screams, tears, begging. Instead, the woman's hand moved to her pocket with deliberate calm. "I have nothing worth stealing," she said, voice steady despite the fear Mahaska could sense in her rigid posture. The outlaws laughed, dismounting, moving closer. "Maybe we ain't interested in your money, darling." What happened next shocked even Mahaska, who had seen his share of combat. Eleanor's hand emerged from her pocket, holding a small Derringer pistol, a 2-shot .41 caliber pocket defender. The lead outlaw lunged, and she fired. The shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him backward. In the chaos that followed, with horses rearing and men shouting, Eleanor bolted for a narrow gap in the rocks. Smart move, too narrow for horses or bulky men to follow quickly. Mahaska watched her disappear into the maze-like formations. The outlaws pursued on foot, cursing. None noticed the Apache observing from above. A white woman with a warrior's instinct. Unusual. Mahaska considered the situation. The outlaws would likely kill her if they caught her. Normally, that would be of no consequence to him. One less white settler meant nothing in the greater war. But something about her courage stirred a reluctant respect. He silently followed the pursuit, moving across the rocks like a shadow. Eleanor had gotten herself impressively lost in the labyrinth of stone. The outlaws had separated, making them vulnerable. Mahaska decided. Not out of mercy for the white woman, but for the opportunity to eliminate 3 enemies with minimal risk. He dropped silently behind the first outlaw, his obsidian knife finding the man's throat before he could cry out. The second fell to an arrow through the back, the broadhead tip piercing his heart. The third, hearing something, turned just in time to see Mahaska's tomahawk before it split his skull, with a sound like an axe hitting a ripe melon. 3 threats eliminated. Mahaska didn't seek out the woman. Let her find her own way back to the fort. If she survived the desert heat, good for her. If not, the coyotes would feast. He had a mission to complete. A week passed. Fort Defiance's security tightened after Eleanor reported the outlaw attack. She'd somehow found her way back, sunburned and dehydrated but alive. Tough woman. Mahaska continued his surveillance, building a detailed mental map of the fort's operations. He observed Wilson's daily routine: target practice at dawn with a Remington New Model Army revolver, hitting 4 out of 5 targets at 25 yards, inspections at 9 years, meals at regular intervals in the officers' quarters, whiskey, at least half a bottle of Kentucky bourbon, in his quarters after sunset. The Apache warrior had nearly settled on a plan to infiltrate the fort when the weather intervened. Storm clouds gathered with unusual speed, turning the sky a sickly green-gray. Experienced with desert weather, Mahaska sought shelter immediately. These sudden storms brought flash floods that could drown a man in minutes. The water roaring down arroyos with enough force to sweep away horses and wagons. From his position, he spotted Eleanor again, far from the fort gathering medicinal herbs. She noticed the approaching storm too late. As rain began hammering down with the intensity only desert storms possess, she tried returning to the fort but took a wrong turn, heading straight toward a box canyon that would fill with floodwater within minutes. Mahaska cursed under his breath. The woman would die, and while one white death meant nothing to him, something about her reminded him of Maria. That same fierce independence, that refusal to cower. Before he could reconsider, he was moving, intercepting her path. When she saw him, tall, painted for war, rifle in hand, she froze. Her hand went to her pocket, where her derringer waited, no doubt. The deluge intensified. Lightning cracked overhead, striking a nearby juniper and splitting it with an explosive crack. Floodwater already swirled around their ankles, carrying debris from higher ground. "Come," Mahaska said in English, the word feeling strange on his tongue. He pointed east. "Shelter." She hesitated, clearly weighing death by Apache against death by drowning. Thunder boomed directly overhead, deciding for her. She followed as Mahaska led them to a cave he'd used before, high enough to escape the flood, deep enough to provide shelter from the storm's fury. Inside, Mahaska built a small fire using flint, steel, and dry wood stored deeper in the cave. The flame caught on the tinder, shredded juniper bark he'd prepared, then spread to the kindling. Eleanor watched his every move, her back pressed against the far wall, hand never leaving her pocket. "You killed those men," she said finally. Not a question. "The outlaws." Mahaska nodded once, feeding the fire carefully. "Why?" He considered not answering, but replied simply, "Bad men, raiders, kill them, fewer enemies." "But I'm your enemy too. Why save me now?" Mahaska's eyes met hers across the fire. Not decided yet. The storm trapped them for hours. In that strange, forced proximity, walls began to crumble. Eleanor spoke first, seemingly preferring words to silence. "I've been told Apaches are savages." "You were told by savages in blue coats who kill women and children," Mahaska replied, his limited English bitter but clear. "Who burn crops? Who poison wells?" That silenced her momentarily. Then, "I'm sorry about your people." "Sorry changes nothing." "No, it doesn't." Her directness surprised him. "Nothing changes what's done. My husband learned that lesson." Something in her tone caught Mahaska's attention. "Your husband?" "Former husband. In Ohio." She stared into the fire. "James liked using his fists when he drank. One night, he wouldn't stop. I hit him with a cast iron skillet. Hard. I didn't wait to see if he lived or died. I just ran." Mahaska studied her with new understanding. A warrior recognizes another warrior, regardless of skin color. This woman had fought for her life, just as his people fought for theirs. "You fought," he said with approval. "Warrior's heart." She laughed bitterly. "I ran. Running from bad fight is wisdom, not weakness." He touched his chest. "If I stay and fight soldiers with Gatling guns, I die. Death with no purpose. My grandfather taught, fight when you can win, hide when you cannot, live to fight another day." The fire crackled between them as rain continued pouring outside. They talked more than either had intended. Mahaska told her of his enlistment in the Mexican army at 23, seeking peace between worlds. How he'd risen to sergeant in Colonel Campos' Northern Division, fighting Comanche and renegade Apaches, his own people. how he'd met Maria in a village near Sonora during a campaign. "She taught me to see beyond tribes," he said, his English improving as he spoke, "to see people as people." But that vision had crumbled when Mexican settlers began encroaching on Apache lands. The Mexican army, his army, was ordered to remove hostile elements. Mahaska refused to participate in attacks against his mother's people. Branded a traitor, he fled with Maria to Apache territory. "My people saw Mexican soldier, not returning son," he explained, touching a long scar that ran from collarbone to ribs, the mark of his difficult reacceptance. "Both sides marked me enemy." Eleanor shared her journey west, seeking invisibility and reinvention. The conversation flowed easier than it should have between supposed enemies. When the storm finally passed, they parted ways without further words. Mahaska watched her return to the fort, wondering why he felt conflicted about a white woman's fate. The next day, Mahaska witnessed something that changed everything. Lieutenant Wilson cornered Eleanor behind the fort's kitchen, his intentions clear in every line of his body. The officer grabbed her arm roughly, his other hand moving to her throat. "I know you're hiding something," Wilson hissed, his voice carrying to Mahaska's position. "No proper white woman survives alone in Apache territory. You've been helping them, haven't you?" "Take your hands off me," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Wilson's grip tightened. "I've broken Apache men. Breaking you will be a pleasure." From his vantage point, Mahaska felt unexpected rage building. Wilson, the murderer of his family, was now threatening a woman who, enemy or not, had earned a measure of respect. The officer ordered a search of Eleanor's quarters. Within minutes, soldiers dragged her back outside. One held up a small turquoise stone, one Mahaska recognized with shock. It had fallen from his medicine pouch during the storm. He'd missed its absence. "Apache trinket," Wilson announced triumphantly. "Proof of collaboration. Take her to the stockade." Mahaska watched Eleanor being dragged away, her attempts to explain ignored. He'd inadvertently condemned her. Wilson would make an example of her, torture for information, then public execution. The warrior had seen it before when the Mexican army captured Apache, women suspected of aiding warriors. His mission to kill Wilson now became complicated by an unexpected obligation. The woman would die because of him. Honor demanded action, regardless of her race. Decision made, Mahaska slipped away to formulate a new plan. He would return after nightfall. Infiltrating Fort Defiance required all of Mahaska's skill. He scaled the 12-foot palisade wall during the changing of the guard. 9:47 p.m. precisely when the night sentry took his position while the day guard headed to the barracks. Mahaska neutralized the watchman with a quick, silent knife thrust to the heart, catching the body before it could thud against the wooden walkway. Moving like a shadow, he located the small stockade where Eleanor was held. The structure stood separate from the main buildings, a precaution against fire and escape attempts. A single guard stood watch, Springfield rifle held carelessly across his chest, more concerned with staying awake than actual vigilance. The guard never saw the wire loop that snared his neck, cutting off both air and sound. Mahaska dragged the body into shadows before retrieving the keys from the man's belt. Inside the crude cell, Eleanor lay curled on a straw pallet, face bruised, lips split. Wilson had begun his interrogation. She startled at Mahaska's appearance, reaching instinctively for a weapon that wasn't there. "Come," he whispered. "Now." "Why?" she demanded, despite her obvious pain. "My stone condemned you. My honor demands I free you." No more explanation was needed. She rose shakily, but with determination. Mahaska supported her weight as they moved through the darkened fort. At the wall he whistled softly, two short notes resembling a cactus wren. Moments later, a rope descended. Hototo, a 17-year-old warrior who'd insisted on joining this dangerous mission despite Mahaska's objections. Alarm bells rang just as they cleared the wall. Shouts erupted behind them. Rifles cracked, bullets splintering wood near their heads. Mahaska pushed Eleanor toward the waiting horses, a pinto stallion for him, a sure-footed buckskin mare for her, turning to provide covering fire. His Winchester barked 3 times. 2 soldiers fell. Wilson appeared at the wall, silhouetted against the torchlight, recognizing his attacker instantly. "The renegade!" he shouted. "Shoot him! $100 to the man who brings me his head!" Mahaska took careful aim. One shot could end Wilson and complete his vengeance. But the angle was wrong. Too many obstacles, too much movement. Another day. They rode hard into the darkness, soldiers in close pursuit. Mahaska led them through treacherous ravines, across dry creek beds. Using every trick learned from a lifetime in this terrain, he rode backward in his saddle, firing precisely at pursuers, not to kill but to delay. Shots that struck hats, canteens, and saddle horns. By dawn, they'd reached the foothills where his people camped. Red mesa formations rose around them, providing natural fortifications that had sheltered Apache bands for generations. Eleanor swayed with exhaustion in her saddle. "They'll kill me if I go back." "Yes," Mahaska agreed grimly, "and now my people may kill you here." Nahali's fury was terrifying even to Mahaska, who had weathered his brother's temper since childhood. "You bring a white woman to our camp?" the war chief roared, his scarred face contorted with rage. "The soldiers will follow her scent like coyotes." At 43, Nahali stood as the last great war leader of their band. His body bore 27 scars from battles with Mexicans, Americans, and rival tribes. The jagged mark across his left cheek came from a cavalry saber at the Battle of Apache Pass. "They would have tortured her for information she doesn't possess," Mahaska replied steadily. "My honor required action." "Your honor?" Nahali spat. "Your honor died with your woman and child. Now all that matters is survival." Around them, the camp had grown silent. Women gathered children close. Warriors, no more than 15 fit for battle, gripped weapons, watching the confrontation between brothers. "I took precautions," Mahaska insisted. "We left no trail." "There is always a trail," Nahali growled. Then switching to English, he addressed Eleanor directly. "Why should I not kill you now? One less white devil in the world." Eleanor, despite her injuries and exhaustion, straightened her spine. "Because I'm no friend to Wilson or men like him. I've seen what your people suffer. I have no love for those who cause such suffering." "Pretty words from a forked tongue," Nahali scoffed. "Test her," interrupted Dasa, their 60-year-old aunt and the band's medicine woman. Her face, deeply lined from 8 decades in the harsh desert, nevertheless radiated wisdom. "If she speaks truth, the spirits will show us." Nahali considered, then nodded sharply. 3 days. She proves her worth or dies. Your responsibility, brother." Mahaska accepted with a single nod. He'd expected worse. The test began immediately. Eleanor was assigned to help Dasa with healing, grinding herbs, preparing poultices, tending the sick. Despite her exhaustion, she worked without complaint. Mahaska observed from a distance, torn between responsibility and the mission he'd temporarily abandoned. Wilson still lived. His family remained unavenged. Yet something had shifted. The woman, Eleanor, had shown courage facing both outlaws and his brother. She worked alongside Dasa with unexpected aptitude, quickly learning which plants healed, which eased pain, which drew infection from wounds. On the 3rd day, as sunset approached, Nahali called a council. Eleanor stood before the assembled band, her copper hair catching the dying light. "The white woman has worked," Dasa announced. "She has learned our ways with plants. Her hands are skilled." Murmurs rippled through the gathering. Not acceptance, but acknowledgement. She is still white, declared Nimeona, Nahele's wife, and a fierce warrior in her own right. Her prowess with a bow was legendary. She could put 3 arrows into a target the size of a man's hand at 50 paces. Her people slaughter ours without mercy. As yours slaughter mine when given the opportunity, Eleanor responded calmly. Men like Wilson exist in both worlds, but so do those who seek a different path. Nahali studied her, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke. You may stay, not as guest, not as prisoner. You will work. You will learn our ways. If you betray us, you die slowly. It was more than Mahaska had expected. As the council dispersed, he approached Eleanor. Why accept this? He asked quietly. You could have demanded we send you to a white settlement. She met his gaze directly. Because sometimes the enemy of my enemy is my only ally. 2 weeks passed. Eleanor integrated into camp life with surprising adaptability. She learned basic Apache phrases, assisted Dasa with healing, even helped the women prepare food. Some still regarded her with suspicion, but others, particularly the children, began accepting her presence. Mahaska found himself drawn to her resilience. She reminded him of Maria, different in appearance but similar in spirit. This troubled him. His heart should remain closed, focused only on vengeance. The decision came suddenly. Scouts reported that Wilson had left Fort Defiance with a small detachment, tracking a group of hostiles who had raided a supply wagon. The lieutenant would be vulnerable, away from the fort's protection. Nahele immediately called the warriors together. We strike tonight, catch them sleeping. Mahaska felt anticipation surge through him. Finally, Wilson would pay. But an unexpected complication arose when Nahele continued. Bring the white woman. If this is a trap, we need leverage. She's not a fighter, Mahaska protested. She carries a gun, does she not? Nahele countered. And she knows Wilson. She may prove useful. There was no arguing with the war chief's logic. That evening, a dozen warriors prepared for battle. Eleanor was given a horse, and her derringer was returned to her. Stay close to me, Mahaska instructed as they mounted. Do exactly as I say. Her expression was grim but determined. I understand. They rode through the night, silent shadows moving across the desert. Near dawn, they located Wilson's camp in a narrow canyon, a poor choice that suggested overconfidence. 6 soldiers slept while 2 stood guard. Nahele signaled the attack plan. Swift, silent, complete. No survivors to report what happened. The Apache warriors surrounded the camp. At Nahele's signal, arrows flew simultaneously, taking down both sentries before they could shout warnings. The remaining warriors charged into the camp. Chaos erupted. Soldiers scrambled for weapons. Gunfire shattered the pre-dawn stillness. Mahaska moved with deadly purpose, seeking one target. Wilson. The lieutenant emerged from his tent, Remington revolver already firing. A warrior fell, clutching his chest. Wilson was a skilled fighter. Mahaska had to acknowledge that much. The officer took cover behind a wagon, continuing to fire with dangerous accuracy. Mahaska circled, Winchester ready. Their eyes met across the battlefield. Recognition flashed in Wilson's face. You, the lieutenant snarled. The Mexican army deserter. Mahaska froze momentarily. How did Wilson know about his past? The hesitation nearly cost him his life. Wilson's bullet grazed his arm. Mahaska returned fire, forcing the officer back into cover. Across the camp, Nahele was engaged with 2 soldiers simultaneously, his war axe a blur of motion. Eleanor remained where Mahaska had positioned her, behind a boulder at the canyon's edge. But as Wilson emerged from cover again, she raised her derringer and fired. The small pistol's report was almost lost amid the larger gunfire, but Wilson staggered, clutching his shoulder. the same one Mahaska had seen her shoot before. The lieutenant's eyes found her, widening with shock and hatred. "Traitor!" he screamed, redirecting his aim toward Eleanor. Mahaska fired instinctively. His bullet struck Wilson in the chest, driving him backward. The lieutenant collapsed, blood spreading across his blue uniform. The remaining soldiers, seeing their commander fall, threw down their weapons. Nahele was upon them instantly, war axe raised. "Wait!" Mahaska called out. "Prisoners!" Nahele turned, fury in his eyes. "They deserve death!" "They may have information," Mahaska countered, "about troop movements, future attacks." It was a practical argument that his brother couldn't dismiss. Nahele ordered the survivors bound. Mahaska approached Wilson, who lay gasping, blood bubbling at his lips. The lieutenant's eyes still burned with hatred. "You think you've won?" Wilson coughed. "The railroad is coming. Washington wants all Indians, gone or dead. You're already ghosts." "Why my family?" Mahaska demanded. "They were peaceful. My wife was Mexican." Wilson's laugh was a wet, terrible sound. "Orders from Washington. Clear the land. For progress. Your family just in the way." The dying man's words hit Mahaska like physical blows. His family hadn't been targeted specifically. They were simply obstacles to be removed, like clearing brush for a road. "The men who ordered this," Mahaska pressed, "their names?" But Wilson's eyes had already glazed over, his final breath rattling out. Nahele approached, looking down at the dead officer. "Is your vengeance satisfied, brother?" Mahaska stared at Wilson's body, feeling hollow. This was just one man following orders. The real enemies sit in Washington, planning our extinction. "Then we fight until we cannot," Nahele stated simply. "It is the Apache way." A commotion interrupted them. One of the bound soldiers had worked free and lunged for a fallen pistol. Before anyone could react, he fired wildly. Nahele stumbled backward, clutching his chest. Blood seeped between his fingers. "No!" Mahaska caught his brother as he fell. Warriors descended on the soldier, his screams mercifully brief. Mahaska cradled Nahele, feeling life drain from the powerful body. "Brother," Nahele gasped, "you must lead now. Take our people, south, Mexico, the mountains." "Save your strength," Mahaska urged, pressing his hand against the wound. Nahele gripped Mahaska's arm with surprising strength. "You were right. Vengeance brings nothing but more death." His eyes shifted to Eleanor, who had approached quietly. The white woman sees with clear eyes. Listen to her. With those unexpected words, the great war chief shuddered and went still. Mahaska remained kneeling, holding his brother's body, grief washing through him. First his wife and child, now his brother. How much more would this war take? Eleanor's hand touched his shoulder, a gesture of shared sorrow that transcended their differences. "We need to move," she said gently. "More soldiers will come." Mahaska knew she was right. He rose, still supporting Nahele's body. "We take him home first, then we go south." 6 months later, high in Mexico's Sierra Madre Mountains, Mahaska stood watching the sunrise paint the peaks gold. The remnants of his band, 43 souls, had established a new camp in a hidden valley, far from American soldiers and their progress. They had found relative peace here. Game was plentiful, deer, turkey, even occasional bear. The hidden valleys provided good soil for corn, beans, and squash. Springs supplied clean water year-round. Most importantly, the rugged terrain offered protection. Any force attempting to root them out would face impossible odds. Eleanor worked alongside Dasa, learning the deeper secrets of Apache medicine. Her copper hair had bleached lighter in the sun, her skin darkened. She moved differently now, more like an Apache woman, less like a white settler. Nimiona approached, carrying her daughter Shima. The fierce woman had become Eleanor's unexpected ally after Eleanor saved Shima during a flash flood. The council fire is lit, Nimiona informed him. They wait for the chief's words. Chief. The title still felt strange. Mahaska had never sought leadership, only justice. But justice, he'd learned, was more complex than vengeance. At the council fire, Mahaska addressed his people. We have survived. We have found new hunting grounds. Our children go to sleep with full bellies and wake without fear. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. But the Americans push southward. Their railroad stretches toward Mexico. One day they will come again. Silence greeted this harsh truth. When that day comes, we will be ready. Not to die in glorious battle, but to survive, as Apache have always survived. By adapting, by learning, by remembering who we are, while becoming what we must be. His eyes found Eleanor among the listeners. She had given him an unexpected gift, perspective from the enemy's side. Understanding their thinking made it possible to anticipate their actions. Later, as darkness fell, she joined him at the edge of camp. Her hand slipped into his, a gesture unthinkable months ago. Your son kicks like a warrior, Mahaska said, placing his palm against the swell of her belly. Or daughter, Eleanor countered with a smile. Either way, a child of two worlds. Mahaska looked north, toward the land of his ancestors. Wilson had been right about one thing. The old Apache way was ending. But Wilson had been wrong about their extinction. They would adapt. They would endure. A week later, scouts reported a disturbing development. A survey party, 12 men with scientific instruments, had been spotted in the foothills, marking routes for the Mexican Northern Railroad. The Iron Horse would soon threaten even this sanctuary. That night, Mahaska led 10 warriors in a precision raid against the surveyor's camp. They struck without warning, without mercy, killing 4, scattering the rest, destroying their equipment and maps. A clear message: this land would not be surrendered. When he returned, blood still on his hands, Eleanor waited. She asked no questions, offered no judgment. She simply helped him wash away the blood. They will send more, Mahaska said finally. Yes, she agreed, but now they know the cost. And when the railroad finally reached them, as he knew it someday must, they would be ready, not for a last glorious battle, but for a new kind of war, a war of shadows and whispers, a war to preserve not land, but a people and their spirit. In his son's face, born 2 months later with his mother's green eyes and his father's strong features, Mahaska saw the future. Not pure Apache, not white, but something new, something that might survive when all else was lost. He named the boy Nahele after his brother, a warrior's name for a different kind of battle.